Hello, friends. This is Scott Monty. Stand by for commentary.
Welcome to the Full Monty, where you'll be exposed to commentary and analysis from the week's digital news. You give us 15 minutes, and we'll save you hours. And now, here's your host, Scott Monty.
Hi, and welcome to the Full Monty, an audio companion to the newsletter of the same name. Each week, I pick a couple of the more pressing issues and inject insight, opinion, and wit into this 15-minute show that's sure to give you a better sense of what's affecting the industry. Maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't, but I hope it makes you think. This week, the importance of communication and leadership, and journalism deserves better. How leaders should communicate. Leaders, particularly business leaders like presidents and CEOs, are typically in the public spotlight. Many times, they're the face of their company, and they give statements to the press or even interact with customers online. As the company's chief spokesperson, the CEO spends about 50% of their time performing functions that are associated with communications. This includes writing, presenting, and public speaking, involving all of an organization's stakeholders. Emails to employees, cogent presentations, question and answer sessions with the board, speeches to town halls, investors, and industry groups. And in doing so, the communicator-in-chief should have a clear, succinct, and memorable message. Because if anything, leadership is about taking complex ideas and making them understandable, relatable, and actionable. In short, effective communication means clarity. So let's pause for a moment and reflect on the communications ability of one of the presidential candidates. There's no doubt that Donald Trump has managed to tap into a vein of discord and dissatisfaction in America, and has used Twitter in particular to fan the flames. The 140-character platform seems perfect for his insults, jabs, and soundbite-laden thoughts. But if you listen to him speak at events where he has unprepared remarks, and let's face it, that's most of them, he speaks in disjointed tweets. But separate from his success with his core supporters, one must ask whether or not his style of speaking helps or hurts the cause with a broader audience. Is it clear? Is it understandable? Does he have a message? Let's look at one speech that an online forum asked readers to help diagram.
Having nuclear, my uncle was a great professor and scientist and engineer, Dr. John Trump at MIT. Good genes, very good genes, okay? Very smart. The Wharton School of Finance, very good, very smart. You know, if you're a conservative Republican, if I were a liberal, if I ran as a liberal Democrat, they would say I'm one of the smartest people anywhere in the world. It's true. But when you're a conservative Republican, they do they do a number? That's why I always thought of went to Wharton, was a good student. Went there, did this, built a fort. I have to give my credentials all the time because we're at a little disadvantage. But you look at the nuclear deal, the thing that really bothers me, it would have been so easy. And it's not as important as these lives are. Nuclear is so powerful. My uncle explained that to me many, many years ago, the power. And that was 35 years ago. He would explain the power of what's going to happen, and he was right. Who would have thought? But when you look at what's going on with the 4 prisoners, now it used to be 3. Now it's 4. But when it was 3, and even now, I would have said it's all in the messenger. Fellas, and it is fellas because, they haven't figured that the women are smarter right now than the men, so, it's going to take them about another 150 years. But the Persians are great negotiators. The Iranians are great negotiators. So, and they just killed us. This is.
Any takers? The only thing worse than having to figure out how to diagram that sentence as having to listen to it over and over again as you get a transcript. While the jumbled thoughts may leave you scratching or even shaking your head, largely due to the lack of coherent message and syntax, there's one thing that Trump can get credit for: repetition. Not a repetition of message, but rather a repetition of words like they and it. Short words. As you think about the leaders that you admire and their ability to effectively communicate, consider Ronald Reagan, who was known as the Great Communicator. Their success doesn't depend on how well they speak to stakeholders who currently support them, but rather on how well they can persuade those that don't yet agree with them. The best leaders are natural storytellers. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they're easy to follow, whether they're written or spoken. And whichever role you inhabit, writer, speaker, or leader, you have a responsibility to your audience to bring them along on the journey with you, ensuring they aren't inadvertently stranded on the way to the common understanding. After all, that's why you're the leader.
Get your trivia skills ready for the naked truth.
This week's trivia question: what two questionable culinary delights were announced last week? Answer at the end of the show. And now, page 2. The future of journalism is not funny. If you didn't get an opportunity to watch John Oliver's rant on what's wrong with journalism on Last Week Tonight, well, you missed a masterpiece. I can't recreate his outrage and his cutting humor, but essentially, he pointed out that the newspaper industry is misguided by two extremely strong forces. First, the motivation of the owners, who are directing what journalists focus on.
It is clearly smart for newspapers to expand online, but the danger in doing that is the temptation to gravitate toward whatever gets the most clicks, which is why news organisations badly need to have leaders who appreciate that what's popular isn't always what's most important.
For anyone who's spent time online, this should be apparent. As you probably know, there have been things like sites that have developed to support nothing but popular content. Sites like Upworthy, Viral Nova, Little Things, those that focus on so-called viral content. That's how BuzzFeed first got its start, with its nefarious listicles. But in fairness, BuzzFeed has evolved by expanding to include more traditional journalistic endeavors, such as an investigative journalism arm known as BuzzFeed News. While it still publishes a good deal of cotton candy content, BuzzFeed has exploited its popularity to call attention to issues undertaken by its investigative news team, a team which, by the way, is headed by a Pulitzer Prize winner. These articles are anything but short-form viral sensations. In fact, they're long-form journalism that are deeply researched. One such example is actually in our newsletter this week, a look at how Twitter has been fighting a losing battle against trolls for 10 years. So it's not as if sticking to the core tenets of journalism is impossible. It just takes a deliberate reworking of the model and a commitment to the craft. What we've witnessed BuzzFeed do is begin with popularity and then slowly turn the dial up to include more intelligent, thoughtful work until there's a mix of both. What traditional papers had to do is just the opposite, dumbing down the content to what they think is meeting readers' expectations. But what they do instead is alienate readers. But back to John Oliver. In addition to laying the blame on publishers and journalists, he also said that the responsibility lies with readers. And I quote, A big part of the blame is on us and our unwillingness to pay for what journalists produce. We've just grown accustomed to getting our news for free, and the longer we get something for free, the less willing we are to pay for it." Unquote. And yet, there are signs of success yet. The Wall Street Journal reported that its digital subscribership is up 25% in the last year to nearly 1 million paying customers. And in a victory of paywall over free, The Times, not the New York Times, The Times, saw a £10.9 million profit on 400,000 readers, while The Guardian saw a £68.7 million loss with 155 million unique browsers. So it's not as if the newspaper industry is devoid of ideas on how to address the issues that Oliver outlined in his piece. And yet, one of the most troubling and misguided responses to Oliver was from none other than the NAA, the Newspaper Association of America. Its CEO, David Shavern, ripped Oliver in an editorial on the NAA website, taking him to task for, quote, making fun of publishers who are just trying to figure it out, unquote, and because, quote, he doesn't seem to have any better ideas, unquote. The editorial vacillated between hurt and defensive before concluding with an outright accusatory and excoriating tone, in which the CEO of the Newspaper Association of America challenged John Oliver. Now, keep in mind, John Oliver is a comedian and a political commentator. He challenged Oliver thusly: "I would just ask Mr. Oliver to spend more time talking about what the future of news could be and less time poking fun at publishers who are trying to get there." And right there, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why the newspaper industry may be doomed. When leadership is too busy pointing fingers and looking for others to solve its problems for them, rather than digging deep and completely reinventing itself, it will continue to circle the drain. We expect our leaders to be clear, sharing hope, not messages of fear. They're deserving of shame when they seek to lay blame on satirists rather than peers. For our trivia question, we asked you what two culinary delights were introduced last week. Well, delights may be a bit of a misnomer. Oreo introduced the Swedish fish-flavored Oreo cookie, and Hostess decided that you shouldn't have to wait for the annual state fair for deep-fried Twinkies. You can now work on clogging your arteries all year round. Be sure to check out other major stories from the August 15th edition of the newsletter. Behind the New Yorker's record-setting web traffic, how the magazine adjusted its staffing strategy, changing the mix of writers so that there are fewer freelancers and more regular contributors, and incorporating a couple of video series. The 10 principles of strategic leadership, from systems and structures to people, policies, and practices, and focusing on the self. And finally, cyberchondria, how self-diagnosing by using the internet is making us sick, just not in the way we think. Well, that's it for this week. With any luck, your brain's a bit bigger now. Thank you for making me a part of your week and for being exposed to the full Monty. Until next time, I'm Scott Monty, and I'll see you on the internet.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Full Monty newsletter and this program at FullMontyShow.com.
Forget cupping. The next big craze, mark my words on this, leeches.